The loyalist silversmith across the street has been watching your shop for 3 hours. He thinks you're repairing plowshares for farmers. He doesn't know that under every slab of iron is the bayonet that will drive his friends out of the city. If he notices the difference in the temper of the steel, your next contract will be a noose, provided free of charge by the Crown. British law forbids the processing of raw iron without a license. You don't have a license. You have a clandestine order from the Continental Army, and a forge that makes too much noise. In this business, the only rule that matters is finishing the shipment before the patrol decides your coal smells a little too much like high treason. Will you deliver these blades to Franklin's contact tonight despite the redcoats at your door, or will you dump them in the river and accept that the revolution will lose its edge because of your caution? If you know how to strike while the iron is hot and the betrayal is close, join the council by subscribing. Signal your strike. The forge is waiting for your orders. You wake before the city does. The coals from last night's banking still hold heat beneath their ash layer, glowing faint orange when you rake them with the iron poker, and the forge responds like a living thing drawing its first breath of the day. Outside, Elfreth's alley is silent, except for the distant clop of a milk cart on 2nd Street. The brick walls around you radiate cold that will not break until the sun clears the roofline in 2 hours. The forge on Elfreth's alley at dawn is the 1776 equivalent of a manufacturing facility, where half the orders will build a new nation, and half will get you hanged for treason. The quality control inspector is a British patrol that does not understand metallurgy. The coals are ready. The hammer is waiting. You add fresh coal in careful layers, building the fire from the center outward, watching the grey ash crack and fall away as orange spreads beneath. The heat begins to build against your face. You step back and reach for the leather apron hanging on its peg beside the bellows. The leather is stiff with old sweat and soot. It smells like every morning for the past 6 years. 3 orders wait on the bench beside the anvil. 12 horseshoes for the Quaker carter, whose mare threw a shoe on Market Street. 8 decorative hinges for the loyalist merchant on 3rd Street, who pays in silver coin and asks no questions about the source of your iron. 20 gun locks for the Continental Army, disguised in the ledger as door hardware private commission, which is technically accurate if you define doors as the mechanisms that keep British muskets from firing reliably. The apprentice arrives as the coals reach working heat. He is 16, learning the trade through observation and burnt fingers, and he does not yet understand that half the forge's work cannot be written in any ledger that might survive British inspection. Stir the coals to cherry red, you say. How hot is cherry red, he asks. 1400 degrees, or when the iron moves under the hammer with particular resistance, you observe. That is not a precise measurement, he says. Precision is learned through burning, you say. He takes the poker and begins working the coals. Sparks rise in lazy arcs toward the chimney. The orange glow deepens to the color of a sunset through smoke, then shifts toward the red gold. That means the forge is ready to shape steel. You watch his technique. He is learning. 3 months ago he would have smothered the fire trying to stir it. Now he understands that fire needs air as much as it needs fuel. You select the first bar of iron stock from the rack. It is cold against your palm, dense with the weight that always surprises people who have never worked metal. Iron does not lie about its mass. You place it into the coals at the hottest point, where the color is brightest, and wait. The heat takes its time. The iron goes from black to deep red, to the cherry color that means it is ready to move. The hammer waits on the anvil. 20 pounds of forged steel. The handle worn smooth by your grip and your father's grip before that. You lift the iron from the coals with the tongs, and place it on the anvil face. The first strike rings out across the alley, a clear high note that will echo off brick until dusk. 12 strikes for a horseshoe. 12 strikes in a rhythm that has not changed in 300 years. The iron flattens under the hammer. Sparks cascade across the anvil and die on the packed earth floor. You rotate the bar, strike again, feel the resistance that tells you the temperature is correct. The apprentice watches from beside the forge. He is learning to read heat by color. He is learning to read rhythm by sound. He does not yet know that he is also learning to forge weapons for an army that does not officially exist in any document the British might discover. The horseshoe takes shape. You return it to the coals, bring it back to heat, shape the curve with precise strikes that match the angle you have forged 1,000 times. The work is automatic. Your hands know what to do before your mind gives the order. This is the nature of the trade, repetition until the body remembers. By the time the sun clears the roofline, you have shaped 3 horseshoes. The apprentice has learned to read cherry red by watching the iron move under your hammer. The forge burns steady. The heat builds in the small space until sweat runs down your spine beneath the leather apron. The door to the alley stands open now, propped with a brick to let the heat escape. Morning air moves through the shop, carrying the smell of coal smoke out into the lane where it mingles with the scent of baking bread from the ordinary 2 doors down. A woman passes with a basket of eggs. She does not look in. The forge is part of the alley's rhythm, no different than the cooper's hammer or the chandler's rendering kettle. 9 horseshoes remain. Beneath them on the order sheet, written in a hand you do not recognize, are the instructions for 20 gun locks that must be completed before the British patrol returns at dusk. The calculation is straightforward. The execution requires precision. You place another bar into the coals and wait for the iron to tell you it is ready. The iron stock arrives at mid-morning, carried by a man you have never seen before. He does not knock. The door opens and he is simply there, holding 3 bars of raw iron wrapped in what appears to be ordinary hemp twine. He sets them on the workbench without ceremony. The usual stock plus special instructions, he says. The instructions are wrapped around the iron. You observe. Seemed efficient, he says. Efficiency and secrecy are not always compatible, you say. He leaves without another word. The door closes. You are alone with the apprentice and 3 bars of iron that weigh more than iron should weigh, which means they are not purely iron. You unwrap the hemp twine carefully. Beneath it, pressed flat against the metal, are 2 folded papers sealed with wax that bears no mark. The iron stock arrives wrapped in coded messages. This is inconvenient for inventory management. You cannot file 3 bars stock iron plus instructions for gun lock assembly, plus warning about loyalist informant, under a single ledger entry. The accounting does not support revolutionary logistics. You break the seal on the first paper. The handwriting is neat, each letter formed with the precision of someone who learned penmanship in a counting house. The message is brief. 20 gun locks. Delivery to the sign of the compass, 3rd Street, after dark, before the 15th. Specify tumbler mechanism per continental standard. Do not use British sear spring geometry. The second paper is shorter. The silversmith across the lane has been recording customer arrivals. Front door customers versus alley entrance customers. His ledger is detailed. Be cautious. You read both papers twice, committing the details to memory, then feed them into the forge. The paper blackens, curls, becomes ash in 3 seconds. The forge does not judge, it simply converts whatever you feed it into heat and carbon. This is one of its more useful qualities. The apprentice watches from the bellows. Was that the order specifications, he asks. Part of them, you say. Where is the rest? In the iron. You take the first bar and examine it in the light from the window. The surface is rough, as iron stock should be, but along one edge there is a series of small notches filed into the metal. You count them. 8 notches. 8 bayonet blanks to be shaped from this stock before the horseshoe order can be completed. The second bar has 12 notches, 12 gunlock components. The third bar is smooth, which means it is actually iron stock for legitimate work. This is how orders arrive now, coded into the metal itself. Nothing written that cannot be burned, nothing spoken that might be repeated. The revolution runs on information that exists only in the moment of transmission, then dissolves into ash or memory. You set the first bar into the coals. The notches will disappear when the iron reaches forging temperature. The message will be gone. The work will remain. The apprentice stirs the coals without being asked. He has learned that certain deliveries require immediate heat. He does not ask why. This is also something he is learning. The bar reaches cherry red. You lift it with the tongs and place it on the anvil. The first strike rings out. You begin shaping the iron toward a form that could be a horseshoe blank, or could be the beginning of a bayonet, depending on how the British inspector chooses to interpret the curve when he arrives at dusk to examine your inventory. The geometry of concealment is precise. A bayonet blank is straight until final shaping. A horseshoe begins curved. If you shape the bayonet to match the bottom curve of the horseshoe, they occupy the same visual profile when stacked. This is either clever metalwork or the geometric foundation of treason. The iron does not distinguish, it simply takes the shape you give it. You work in silence. The hammer finds its rhythm. 12 strikes, rotate 12 more. The heat builds. Sweat runs into your eyes. You do not stop to wipe it away. The work requires continuity. Any pause is a break in the metal's memory. Iron remembers interruption. It shows in the grain. By noon you have shaped 4 blanks that are either horseshoes or weapons, depending on who is asking. The apprentice has learned to watch the door while you work. He has positioned himself where he can see the street through the gap in the shutters. This is not something you taught him. This is something he learned by watching which deliveries make you move faster. You bank the coals and step outside for air. The alley is empty except for a cat picking through refuse near the corner. Across the lane, the silversmith's shop is closed, shutters drawn. He is somewhere else today. Recording customer patterns. Building his ledger of observations that will either remain private notes or become evidence, depending on how the war turns. The air tastes like rain coming, though the sky is clear. Your shirt clings to your back beneath the leather apron. The brick wall behind you holds the morning's heat, radiating it back into the narrow space between buildings. A barrel hoop leans against the chandler's door 2 shops down, waiting for repair. The ordinary world persists around the hidden one. You return inside. The forge is waiting. 8 more blanks to shape before dusk. 12 gunlock components to begin after dark, when the British patrol has completed its rounds, and the alley returns to the people who have reasons to work when no one is watching. The apprentice adds coal without being asked. The fire breathes. The hammer waits on the anvil. You reach for the second bar and place it into the heat. The forge has been burning since dawn. What is unusual is that your forge has developed opinions about your work. It burns hotter when you shape bayonets. It sulks when you waste time on decorative hinges for loyalist customers. This is either remarkable metallurgical intuition, or you have been breathing coal smoke for too long. The forge does not care about your divided loyalties. It only cares about the quality of your iron and the truth of your hammer strikes. You noticed it first 3 weeks ago, when the Continental captain arrived with his coded request for door locks that were not door locks. The coals responded before you added fresh fuel. The heat climbed from cherry red to orange-white without intervention. The forge wanted to work. It pulled air through its own throat. The bellows became optional. Today the pattern continues. You are shaping the 8th bayonet blank, the one that must match the curve of a horseshoe exactly, or the entire concealment geometry collapses under British inspection. The moment you place the iron into the coals, the temperature surges. The metal reaches working heat in half the usual time. The forge is eager. "The forge is burning very hot today," the apprentice observes. "It responds to the work," you say. "Can forges have preferences?" he asks. "Everything that breathes has preferences," you say. He considers this while stirring the coals. Sparks rise and die in the updraft. The chimney draws like a throat pulling air. The forge is alive in the way that all fire is alive, which is to say it consumes and transforms and demands feeding, and if you fail to feed it correctly, it dies and takes your livelihood with it. You lift the iron from the heat. It glows the color of a summer sunrise, orange gold with undertones of white where the hottest points meet air. You place it on the anvil and strike. The hammer rings true. The iron moves under the blow with a particular resistance that means the temperature is perfect. 12 strikes. Rotate. 12 more. The curve takes shape. This is the 8th blank. This is the one that must be perfect. The British inspector will examine the top layer of horseshoes on your workbench. He will look for irregularities. He will look for anything that suggests your forge produces more than agricultural hardware. 8 bayonets beneath 12 horseshoes is only invisible if the 8 are shaped to match the 12 exactly. You return the blank to the coals. The forge accepts it, pulls it into the hottest zone without being directed. You have not moved the iron. The forge has moved the iron. This is either a convection current you do not understand, or the forge has decided this blank matters more than the decorative hinge commission waiting on the bench. The apprentice watches the metal glow. He is learning to see what you see, the color that means ready, the color that means wait, the color that means you have 15 seconds before the iron passes from workable to ruined. He does not yet know that he is also learning to see the difference between a horseshoe and a weapon, which is a dangerous thing to know in a city where half the population would turn you in for the price of a hot meal. You shape the curve with precision. The arithmetic is exact. The bottom arc of a horseshoe follows a geometry that has not changed since horses were domesticated. The bottom third of a bayonet, before the taper begins, follows the same curve if you are willing to sacrifice 6 inches of blade length. You are willing. 6 inches of blade is the difference between a weapon and a farming tool. 6 inches of blade is the difference between hanging and continuing to forge. The blank cools on the anvil. You examine it against the light from the window. The curve matches. You set it with the other 7. They are identical. This is either quality craftsmanship or a conspiracy so precise it could only have been planned by someone who understands metal at the molecular level. The forge hisses as you add the next bar of stock. This one is for the loyalist merchant's decorative hinge. The coals respond differently. The heat holds steady but does not surge. The forge is doing its job without enthusiasm. You can feel the difference. The air does not pull as hard. The metal takes longer to reach cherry red. You work the hinge with the same precision you gave the bayonet blanks, because quality is its own form of security. The loyalist merchant pays in silver coin. He examines every hinge with a jeweler's eye. He is testing you. Every commission is a test. If your work is flawless for continental orders but mediocre for loyalist customers, the pattern will reveal itself in his ledger. Inconsistency is evidence. So you forge the hinge with care. You shape the decorative scrollwork with the same attention you gave the bayonet curve. The forge tolerates this. It does not help. It simply burns at the temperature you set and waits for you to return to work that matters. By mid-afternoon you have completed 3 hinges and 9 bayonet blanks. The apprentice has learned to read the forge's moods by watching how quickly the iron reaches working heat. He does not comment on this. He simply adjusts the bellows timing to match what the forge is already doing. You step outside for water. The alley is bright with afternoon sun. The silversmith's shop across the lane is open now. Shutters pulled back, and you can see him at his workbench examining something small with a jeweler's loupe. He does not look up. He does not need to. He knows you are there. He has known you are there since dawn, when the first hammer strike echoed across the lane. You drink the water slowly. It tastes like the iron in the well, metallic and cold. Your hands are black with soot. Your forearms ache from the hammer's weight. This is the ordinary exhaustion of the trade. This is what every blacksmith in every city feels at the end of a long day. Except your exhaustion carries an additional weight. The weight of knowing that every strike of the hammer is either building a nation or condemning you to a noose. The weight of knowing that the forge has opinions about which one it prefers. The water bucket sits in the corner where morning shadow has kept it cool. You dip the ladle again and pour it over your wrists, watching the black soot run down your forearms in thin streams. The water pools on the packed earth floor, darkening it. In an hour the ground will have drunk it all and left no trace. You return inside. The coals are waiting. The apprentice has added fresh coal without being asked. The forge breathes deep and pulls the heat toward orange. You reach for the 10th blank and place it into the coals. The forge surges in response. The work continues. The hammer finds its rhythm. The iron takes the shape you give it, and the forge burns with an enthusiasm that cannot be explained by fuel alone. You place 12 horseshoes on the workbench. Beneath them are 8 bayonet blanks. The apprentice enters from the back room carrying fresh stock iron. He stops. Looks at the arrangement. His eyes move from the horseshoes to the faint outlines visible beneath. Why shape the bayonets with that curve? He asks. They stack beneath the horseshoes with identical profile. You explain. He leans closer, studies the geometry. That is very precise geometry. Precision is the difference between clever and discovered, you observe. Your morning commission is 12 horseshoes. Beneath the horseshoe order are 8 bayonet blanks. The geometry of concealment is precise. Bayonet blanks are straight until final shaping. Horseshoes are curved from the beginning. If you shape the bayonets to match the bottom curve of the horseshoes, they occupy the same visual profile when stacked. This is either clever metalwork or the mathematical foundation of treason. The iron does not distinguish. You lift the first bayonet blank, place it in the coals. Wait for the heat to tell you when. The mathematics are straightforward. 12 horseshoes provide coverage for 8 bayonets, if the inspector does not lift the top layer. British inspectors are required to examine the top layer only. British inspectors are also allowed to examine anything that looks suspicious. 8 bayonets do not look suspicious if they are shaped exactly like the bottom curve of 12 horseshoes. The apprentice banks the coals higher. How long until the patrol? 2 hours. The horseshoes first. All 12. Then the bayonets beneath while the forge is still hot. He nods. Reaches for the tongs. His hands have stopped shaking when he handles the continental orders. 3 months ago they shook. Now they move with the same precision you use when measuring temperature by color alone. The iron reaches cherry red. You lift it, place it on the anvil. The first strike lands clean. Outside, boots on cobblestone. Not the patrol, someone moving fast. The steps fade toward 2nd Street. You shape the curve. 12 strikes in the pattern a horseshoe requires. The apprentice watches the rhythm. He is learning what a horseshoe sounds like, when it is actually a horseshoe. Later he will need to know what a horseshoe sounds like when it is not. The air near the forge carries the smell of coal smoke and heating iron. Beneath that, the sharper scent of flux you brushed onto the bayonet blank before placing it in the coals. Flux prevents scale formation during heating. Horseshoes do not require flux. The smell is faint enough that someone standing in the doorway would not notice. Someone standing at the anvil would. The apprentice does not ask about the flux. The Quaker merchant's son will arrive at mid-morning with the week's coal delivery. He has been watching your shop for 3 months. His observations are becoming more specific. Last week he mentioned that your forge glows very late on certain nights. You told him ironwork requires consistent heat, and nighttime temperatures are more stable. This is technically true. This is also not the reason. The first horseshoe is complete. You place it on the workbench. Reach for the second blank. The British patrol will arrive in 2 hours. The geometry must be perfect. The apprentice stands beside the forge watching the coals. How do you know when the steel is ready, he asks. Cherry red moves with particular resistance, you say. He leans closer to the heat, squints at the color. I cannot see the difference. You will after you ruin enough iron learning. The steel glows in the coals. Not orange, not white, cherry red, exactly cherry red. The steel temperature for shaping is cherry red. This is 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. You know this without a thermometer, because cherry red steel moves under the hammer with a particular resistance. Too hot, and it sparks. Too cold, and it cracks. The British inspector does not know how to read steel temperature by color. This is the only reason your bayonet work has not been discovered. You lift the bar with the tongs. The weight tells you the thickness before the hammer does. 3/4 inch stock, good for bayonet shanks, too heavy for decorative work. The inspector who came last month looked at your hinge commissions and nodded, examined the coal bin and moved on. He did not know that decorative hinges require yellow heat, not cherry red. He did not know that yellow heat leaves the forge cooler than cherry red by exactly 200 degrees. He did not know that a forge running at cherry red, when the only work visible is decorative, means the real work is hidden. The anvil rings. 12 strikes. The curve takes shape beneath the hammer. The apprentice pumps the bellows. The coals brighten. He has learnt the rhythm. Add air when the iron cools. Stop before it sparks. Outside, a cart passes. The driver calls something to someone across the street. Laughter. Normal morning sounds on Elfreth's alley. You shape the second horseshoe. Place it on the workbench beside the first. The heat from the forge radiates outward in waves. Your forearms carry the warmth, even when you step back from the coals. The apprentice's face is flushed on the left side, pale on the right. He has learned to stand at an angle. Direct exposure to forge heat for more than an hour causes blisters. The loyalist silversmith across the lane opened his shop an hour ago. His window faces your door. From there he can see everyone who enters. He cannot see the workbench where the horseshoes cover the bayonets. He cannot see the forge temperature. But he can see the glow through the window at night when most forges have banked their coals. You reach for the third bar. The heat is perfect. The color has not changed. The apprentice watches you lift the iron. The temperature is exactly the same as the last one. Yes. How? Practice, you say, and knowing what happens when you get it wrong. The hammer falls. The metal shapes. The mathematics of heat and force convert intention into form. The tongs leave faint marks on the iron where they gripped. These marks will disappear during final shaping. You rotate the bar a quarter turn. The next strike lands precisely where the curve must deepen. The inspector cannot read temperature by color. This knowledge has kept you alive for 16 months. Your shirt is damp at the collar. The forge has been burning for 3 hours. The heat does not relent. You do not step away. The rhythm must mask the work. You strike the anvil 12 times, the pattern a horseshoe requires. The apprentice listens. The rhythm sounds the same for both, he says. 3 strikes are in different locations, you observe. Can anyone hear that difference? Anyone who knows what to listen for. The hammer rhythm must mask the work. Shaping a horseshoe requires 12 strikes in a specific pattern. Shaping a bayonet requires 12 strikes in a nearly identical pattern with 3 strikes in different locations. To anyone listening from the street, both sound like horseshoe work. To anyone who knows metallurgy, the difference is obvious. The Quaker merchant's son is learning metallurgy. The 9th horseshoe is complete, you place it with the others. 3 remain. Outside boots approach, not the patrol, wrong rhythm, someone walking, not marching. The Quaker merchant's son appears in the doorway, he carries a manifest on thick paper. His eyes move from the forge to the workbench to your face. Good morning, he says. The coal shipment. Leave it by the side door. Of course. He does not move. You are working early. Commission deadline. He nods. Glances at the horseshoes on the workbench, 12 of them now visible. His gaze lingers. Large order. Stable work. I see. He shifts the manifest to his other hand. My father has been asking about metallurgy instruction. He thinks I should understand the craft better. You lift the next bar from the coals. The basics are simple. Heat, force, time. And the complications? Everything else. The apprentice moves to the coal bin, opens it. The Quaker's son follows him out. You wait until the door closes. Then you lift the first bayonet blank from beneath the horseshoes. The coals are still cherry red. The temperature has held. The hammer falls. 12 strikes. 3 in different locations. To the apprentice returning from the coal delivery, it sounds like the 11th horseshoe. To anyone who knows metallurgy, it sounds like exactly what it is. The anvil is cold where the hammer does not strike, your free hand rests there between blows. The temperature difference is 40 degrees. Enough to feel, not enough to matter. The shaped metal throws off a smell when struck. Hot iron has a scent, distinct from cold iron. Sharper. Almost sweet. The apprentice noticed it his first week. Stopped mentioning it his second. You place the shaped bayonet back beneath the horseshoes. Reach for the second blank. The British patrol will arrive in 40 minutes. The geometry is perfect. The temperature is exact. The Quaker merchant's son is learning metallurgy. The hammer falls again. Outside, a dog barks twice, stops. The lane is quiet, except for the rhythm of your hammer and the low hiss of the coals. The British patrol will arrive in 2 hours. You have 12 horseshoes on the workbench. Beneath them are 8 bayonet blanks. The mathematics of concealment are straightforward. 12 horseshoes provide coverage for 8 bayonets if the inspector does not lift the top layer. British inspectors are required to examine the top layer only. British inspectors are also allowed to examine anything that looks suspicious. 8 bayonets do not look suspicious if they are shaped exactly like the bottom curve of 12 horseshoes. This is either clever metalwork or treason. The mathematics do not distinguish. You arrange the horseshoes. Each one covers precisely the width of a bayonet blank beneath. The overlap is 3/4 of an inch on each side. You have measured this 17 times. The apprentice enters from the alley door. He closes it carefully. He does not make noise. What if the inspector lifts the horseshoes? The apprentice asked. Then the geometry must be perfect enough to pass as unfinished horseshoe work, you calculated. That is a very thin margin, he said. All margins are thin when the alternative is hanging, you observed. He nods, returns to the back room. You hear him banking the forge coals for the inspection. The temperature must be neutral when they arrive. A hot forge during an inspection raises questions you cannot answer. The horseshoes are arranged in 4 rows of 3. The bayonets beneath match the curve exactly. You have shaped each bayonet to mirror the bottom arc of the horseshoes above them. If lifted, they appear to be unfinished horseshoe stock. The tangs are not yet formed. The nail holes are not yet punched. They are horseshoes that have been shaped, but not completed. They are also bayonets that will fit Brown Bess muskets, The geometry holds if the inspector sees only curves and assumes matching function. The geometry fails if the inspector understands that horseshoes and bayonets share identical tempering requirements and questions why both are present in the same shop at the same time. You lift one horseshoe, examine the bayonet beneath, the curve is perfect, you set it back down, alignment exact. The air in the shop has changed. Not temperature. Smell. The forge coals banked an hour ago still carry the iron bite of hard work. Metal heated past red into white, the sharp mineral taste that settles in the back of your throat. But beneath that, dust. The fine powder that accumulates on surfaces when no one moves through a space. You disturbed it arranging the horseshoes. It rises now, in the slant light from the window, visible only at certain angles. The British inspector will smell the forge work. He will not smell the dust. He will assume continuous operation, legitimate business, a blacksmith who keeps regular hours. The dust tells a different story. It marks the spaces between customers. The hours when the front door stays closed, and the real work happens in the back room. You run one finger along the window ledge. It comes away grey. You wipe it on your apron. Boots on cobblestone. 2 men, military stride. You place both hands on the workbench. Wait. The question is not whether the geometry is correct. The question is whether you have had enough time to verify it under pressure, and you have not. The patrol passes. They do not enter. You wait 30 minutes. Then, return to work. The Quaker merchant's son arrives at mid-afternoon. He carries a list. Hardware order. Legitimate. His father owns 3 properties on 2nd Street. The hinges you forged last month are holding well. Your forge glows very late some nights, the merchant's son said. Ironwork requires consistent heat and nighttime is more stable, you explained. That is a reasonable explanation, he observed. Most reasonable explanations are technically accurate, you said. He examines the list. Orders 6 door hinges, 2 fireplace grates, 1 iron pot hook. Standard civilian work. His father pays on delivery. No credit. No delay. The Quaker merchant's son is asking why your forge glows brightest when British patrols are furthest away. This is a reasonable question. The answer is that late-night forging allows you to work on continental orders without daytime observation. You cannot say this. You say that ironwork requires consistent heat and nighttime temperatures are more stable. This is technically true. This is also not the reason. The merchant's son is learning to ask questions that have technically true answers that are not the reason. He hands you the list. You fold it. Place it in your apron pocket. How long for the hinges? He asks. 4 days, you say. That is acceptable. He leaves through the front door. The lane outside is empty. The silversmith's shop across the way shows closed shutters. Tuesday afternoon. He closes early on Tuesdays. You return to the workbench. The horseshoes remain in place. The bayonets beneath remain invisible. The inspection mathematics held for 1 patrol. They will return. Inspections do not happen once. You lift a horseshoe, set it aside, remove the bayonet blank beneath. It needs edge grinding. The hammer work is complete, but the blade is unfinished. You carry it to the grinding wheel. The wheel is dry. You pour water from the bucket onto the stone surface. It darkens immediately, the grey stone turning nearly black where the water soaks in. The liquid runs in thin streams toward the low point, pools briefly, then drips onto the floor. You press the foot pedal. The wheel begins to turn. The bayonet blank touches the stone. Sparks appear, not the bright yellow-white of forged sparks. These are smaller, orange, brief. They fall in an arc that matches the wheel's rotation. Some land on your apron. Some reach the floor. All of them die before they can ignite anything. The metal grows warm under your hands. You can feel the heat building where the blade meets the stone. The friction is doing its work, the rough edge is becoming smooth. The geometry is becoming precise. You rotate the blank, work the other edge. More sparks, the same orange arc. The water on the wheel turns grey with metal dust. It runs off the stone in dark rivulets, carries the residue toward the floor drain. The smell is different from forge work. Grinding smells clean, sharp, like stones after rain. There is no coal smoke, no sulfur, no oil, just water and steel, and the particular scent of metal, being worn away one particle at a time. You lift the blank from the wheel, hold it to the light, the edge is clean, no burrs, no rough patches. You run your thumb along the spine, careful, not testing sharpness, only checking for irregularities. The blade is ready for tempering. You set it on the workbench, pick up the next blank, return to the wheel. 3 hours of work remaining before dark. The Continental Army captain arrives after sunset. He does not knock. He enters through the alley door as though he has been here before. He has. Twice. Both times after dark. "I need door locks for the new camp," the captain said quietly. "How many locks?" You confirmed. 20 by month's end, he said. "That is a significant order," you observed. "The doors are very important," he said. "Gun locks." He is ordering gun locks. The camp is Valley Forge. "The doors are muskets. 20 locks is enough to arm one platoon with functional firing mechanisms, while the rest of the Continental Army drills with weapons that cannot shoot." You calculate the timeline. 20 gun locks. Each requires 4 hours of work. 80 hours total. Month's end is 16 days away. 5 hours per day for 16 days equals 80 hours if you work without error, and without discovery, and without the British patrol deciding that your forge activity warrants closer examination. The captain waits. He does not hurry you. He understands that accepting this order is a decision that carries consequences you must calculate before committing. "The work will be completed," you say. He nods. Hands you a folded paper. The specifications are written in a hardware supplier's format. Tumbler dimensions. Spring measurements. Frizzen angle. Anyone reading this document would see door lock components. Anyone who understands gun locks would see a Brown Bess firing mechanism drawn with perfect accuracy. "Quality is more important than speed," the captain says. "Quality will be consistent," you say. He leaves through the alley door. You hear his boots on cobblestone, then nothing. You unfold the paper. Study the specifications. The tumbler diameter is 0.75 inches. The sear spring must be tempered to cherry red. The frizzen angle must be 63 degrees. The paper is good stock, heavy, the kind used for legal documents and military orders. It does not tear easily. The ink is black, applied with a steady hand. No blots, no corrections. Someone copied these specifications with care. You hold it closer to the candle. The light shows faint impressions beneath the current text. This paper has been used before, scraped clean, written on again. Standard practice for military supply requests. Paper is expensive, reuse is expected. But the impressions underneath are not supply orders, they are names. A roster. You can make out fragments. Highest drum and Pain Tom and Issis T. A casualty list. Someone scraped it clean and used the paper for lock specifications. You fold it again, place it in your jacket pocket. The forge is cold. You will need to rebuild the fire. Coal first, then kindling, then the slow work of bringing the temperature up to forging heat. 2 hours of preparation before the first tumbler can be shaped. You walk to the coal bin. The supply is lower than it should be. 14 days of sustained work will require more fuel than you currently have. You will need to order from the coal merchant on Market Street. He delivers on Thursdays. The apprentice appears in the doorway. "Another late order?" he asked. 20 mechanisms, you say. 16 days. He nods, says nothing. Walks to the coal bin, begins filling the forge. You return to the workbench, pull out the specifications again, study the tumbler dimensions. 0.75 inches. Brown best standard. The Continental Army is still using captured British weapons. They need parts that fit enemy muskets because they do not have enough American-made rifles to matter. 20 mechanisms will keep 20 muskets firing. It will not win the war, it will not change the outcome at Valley Forge. It will mean that 20 soldiers can shoot instead of drilling with weapons that click empty when they pull the trigger. You have committed to work you cannot safely complete on a timeline that allows almost no margin for error, and the only verification you have is the captain's quiet voice, and a casualty list scraped thin enough to hold lock specifications. The Continental Army captain enters through the alley door at mid-afternoon. He does not knock. You are at the forge, shaping the 7th horseshoe of the morning. The iron glows cherry red. The hammer strikes twice, then pauses. The captain waits until the 3rd strike before speaking. "I need camp kettles," he says. You set the horseshoe aside and reach for the tongs. "How many?" 40 by the end of the month. Camp kettles are not made at a blacksmith's forge. Camp kettles are made at foundries with casting equipment you do not possess. The captain knows this. You know this. The apprentice, standing near the back wall, does not know this yet. Camp kettles require specific dimensions, you say. Musket bore dimensions, the captain says, standard issue. You lift the tongs and adjust the coal bed, the forge hisses. 40 camp kettles will require considerable stock. The stock will arrive in 3 shipments, he says, marked for kettle repair. The apprentice is watching now, learning. I also need door locks, the captain continues, 20 by month's end. You set the tongs down. Door locks require different specifications than camp kettles. The doors are very important, he says. The Continental Army captain speaks in code about camp kettles and door locks. Camp kettles means musket parts. Door locks means gun lock mechanisms. This is either operational security or the most inefficient ordering system ever developed. You are forging freedom through a customer service interaction that sounds like a hardware store conversation. The revolution will be won through extremely boring supply chain management. The captain leaves through the alley door. The apprentice crosses to the workbench. 20 door locks means 20 gun lock mechanisms, you say to the apprentice. Why not just say gun locks, he asks. Because half the customers in Philadelphia would report that conversation, you explain. That seems inefficient, he says. Survival is often inefficient, you observe. You return to the forge. The coals are ready. The stock iron waits. The first camp kettle order will arrive tomorrow, disguised as scrap metal for ordinary repair work. The accounting will list it as foundry returns. The ledger will show nothing that could condemn you. The apprentice picks up the hammer. How do we make musket parts that look like camp kettles? Carefully, you say, and late at night when the forge glow does not attract questions. He nods. The hammer strikes once. The rhythm continues. The afternoon light shifts to amber through the high windows. Dust particles drift in the diagonal beams, suspended in the heated air rising from the forge. The smell of coal smoke mixes with the iron tang of metal filings that coat every surface in the workshop. Your leather apron carries the scent of 1,000 forge sessions, the hide permanently stained with ash and scale. The apprentice sweeps the floor near the anvil. The bristles scrape against stone. Each stroke disturbs more dust than it collects, but the motion serves a purpose beyond cleanliness. It keeps his hands occupied, while his mind processes the coded conversation he has just witnessed. The door locks, he says, pausing mid-sweep. Do they require the same steel as the camp kettles? Different grades, you say. Lock mechanisms need spring steel. Musket barrels need a harder composition. He resumes sweeping. The forge ticks as the metal cools. Outside, a cart passes on 2nd Street, wheels grinding against cobblestone. The ordinary sounds of Philadelphia commerce continue, indifferent to the coded work being arranged inside this particular forge. You check the horseshoe cooling on the workbench. Still too hot to handle. The iron will need another 3 minutes before you can examine the curve. Time moves at its own pace in metalwork. You cannot rush the cooling any more than you can rush the captain's orders. The apprentice sets the broom against the wall. When do we start the camp kettles? When the stock arrives, you say, not before. He understands. The timing matters as much as the fabrication. Too early, and the work sits visible in the shop, inviting questions. Too late, and the captain's deadline passes. The window for this kind of work is narrow, measured in days rather than weeks. The horseshoe has cooled enough to touch. You lift it with bare hands and examine the curve. Acceptable. You set it aside with the other 6. Tomorrow they will be fitted to the merchant's draft horses. Today they serve as evidence of legitimate business. Should anyone inquire about the forge's production, the British gun lock arrives 3 days later, wrapped in canvas and delivered by the Quaker merchant's son. He sets it on the workbench without comment. You unwrap it. The lock is standard issue, regulation weight, regulation dimensions. The tumbler mechanism shows wear consistent with field use. The apprentice leans closer. What are we examining? Failure patterns, you say. You open the lock housing. The tumbler, sear, mainspring and frizzen are all present. The sear spring shows a clean fracture line near the mounting point. You hold it up to the window light. Blood red tempering, you say. The apprentice does not understand yet. You set the broken spring on the workbench and reach for your own lock design. The sear spring in your version is darker, heavier. The tempering color is cherry red instead of blood red. The British locks fail because the sear spring is tempered wrong. You explain to the captain when he returns that evening. Can you correct this? He asks. Yes, but it adds 15 minutes per lock, you say. The soldiers need locks that work, he says. Then 15 minutes is acceptable, you observe. The captain examines your sample lock, tests the tumbler action, dry fires the mechanism twice. The sear holds. The spring does not fracture. How many failures have you documented, he asks. 17 in the last 3 months, you say. All with the same fracture pattern. He sets the lock down. The British are tempering at blood red because it is faster. 200 degrees faster, you say. And 200 strikes less reliable. The apprentice is taking notes now, recording the temperature specifications, learning that the revolution runs on metallurgical precision disguised as routine forge work. The captain leaves. You return to the workbench. The broken British spring sits beside your corrected design. The difference is invisible to anyone who does not know how to read temper colors. The difference means a musket that fires when needed, instead of failing in the field. You place the British lock in the back room. The failure pattern is now documented. The correction is verified. The Continental locks will take 15 extra minutes each. The soldiers will understand why your locks do not fail when the moment comes. The evening air cools the workshop. You open the side window to clear the forge smoke that has accumulated during the day's work. The breeze carries the smell of the Delaware River, 2 blocks east. Wet wood, fish, the particular dampness of tidal mud at low water. The apprentice arranges the failed British springs on the workbench in chronological order. 17 broken pieces, each one a record of the same manufacturing flaw, repeated across 3 months. The fracture lines are nearly identical, as if the springs were following a script written into their molecular structure by incorrect heat treatment. They all broke in the same place, he observes. Stress concentrates at the mounting point, you say. When the tempering is too soft, the spring fatigues exactly there. He picks up the earliest failure, dated from late January. The metal is cold now, inert. It no longer remembers the moment it snapped, leaving a soldier with a useless musket at whatever moment he needed it to fire. The spring is simply broken metal, waiting to be melted down and reforged into something more reliable. You light a second lamp as the natural light fades. The workshop takes on the warm cast of oil flame, shadows deepening in the corners where tools hang on their pegs. The anvil becomes a dark silhouette. The workbench glows. "How do you know cherry red is correct?" the apprentice asks. "Testing," you say. "I tempered 20 springs at different heats. Only cherry red survived 2,000 strikes without failure." "That is a lot of testing," he says. "The alternative is a lot of failures in the field," you observe. He sets the broken spring back in its place among the others. The row of failures tells a clear story to anyone who knows how to read metallurgical evidence. The British are prioritizing production speed over reliability. The Continental approach prioritizes reliability over speed. The soldiers will make the final determination about which approach serves them better. The lamp flame wavers as a gust moves through the open window. You close it halfway. The workshop settles into the particular quiet of evening, when the day's hammering has ceased, and the night's covert work has not yet begun. The tumbler assembly requires 4 components to function correctly: tumbler, sear, mainspring, frizzen. Each component depends on precise heat treatment. Each component fails in specific ways when the tempering is wrong. You are forging the 8th gunlock of the week. The apprentice watches as you heat the sear spring to cherry red, then quench it in oil. The color shift is subtle. The temperature difference is 200 degrees. "Why does the temperature difference matter so much?" the apprentice asks. 200 degrees determines whether the spring fractures or holds, you explain. "That seems like a very small margin," he says. "Most critical margins are small. That is what makes them critical," you observe. The spring cools in the oil bath. You lift it with the tongs and examine the surface. No visible cracks, no stress patterns. The cherry red tempering produces a spring that will survive field use. The British blood red tempering produces a spring that fractures after exactly 200 strikes. The gunlock mechanism has 4 components: tumbler, sear, mainspring, frizzen. The British-made locks fail because the sear spring is tempered at blood red instead of cherry red. Blood red is 1200 degrees. Cherry red is 1400 degrees. The 200-degree difference means British locks fail after exactly 200 strikes. You have corrected this in your Continental design. This adds 15 minutes to each lock. The Continental Army captain does not understand why your locks take longer. The soldiers understand why your locks do not fail. The gunlock does not care about production schedules. It only cares whether the sear spring was tempered correctly. You assemble the tumbler mechanism. The sear fits into the housing. The mainspring provides tension. The frizzen strikes correctly. The lock cycles without binding. The apprentice records the completion time. 15 minutes longer than British regulation. 15 minutes that ensure the lock will not fail when the soldier needs it. You set the finished lock aside. 19 more remain on the captain's order. Each one will take 15 extra minutes. Each one will survive field use. The arithmetic is clear. The Continental Army needs locks that work under pressure. You forge locks that work under pressure. The coals fade to orange as evening arrives. The hammer rests on the workbench. The day's production sits in careful rows, waiting for delivery through the alley door after dark. The oil in the quenching bath has gone still, its surface reflecting the dying forge light. You pour it back into the storage crock and wipe the workbench clean. Metal filings gather in the cloth, the residue of a day spent filing, fitting, adjusting components to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The apprentice wraps the completed locks in oiled canvas. 8 locks, each one tested, each one meeting the specifications that will keep it functional through hard use. The canvas parcels look identical from the outside. Only unwrapping them would reveal their purpose, and no one unwraps parcels in transit unless they have reason to suspect contraband. How many more this week, he asks. 4 more before Sunday, you say, then 12 next week to complete the order. He ties the canvas with hemp cord. The knots are neat, professional. He has learned this from watching you prepare shipments. Everything in this work must appear routine, unremarkable. The locks are components for door repair. The paperwork will say this. The delivery will occur at a reasonable hour. Nothing will suggest otherwise to casual observation. The workshop has grown cold. You bank the forge, covering the remaining coals with ash, to preserve them for tomorrow. The fire exhales a final breath of smoke that rises toward the ventilation gap in the roof. Outside, the street is quiet. Most of Philadelphia has gone to supper. Same time tomorrow, the apprentice asks. Same time, you confirm. He leaves through the front door carrying nothing. The wrapped locks remain on the workbench. The captain will collect them after full dark, entering through the alley as always, conducting his business in the brief minutes when 2nd Street is momentarily empty of traffic. You extinguish the lamps. The workshop falls into darkness, still warm from the forge, still smelling of coal smoke and hot metal. The workbench holds tomorrow's materials, already measured, already prepared. The routine continues. The locks accumulate. The revolution proceeds one careful tempering at a time. The loyalist silversmith across the lane has been watching your shop for 6 months. He knows which customers use the front door and which use the alley entrance. Front door customers are civilian commissions. Alley entrance customers are continental orders. This pattern is either obvious or you have been careless. The silversmith's friendly waves are either genuine neighborliness or evidence collection. You cannot determine which without asking a question that reveals you know he is watching. His workshop faces yours at a 45-degree angle, perfect sightline. From his bench position he can see both your entrances without turning his head. He works silver, teapots, candlesticks, engraved flatware for Philadelphia families wealthy enough to commission decorative metal during wartime. His customers arrive in carriages. Your customers arrive on foot. This morning he is polishing a serving tray in his window. You are filing the burrs from a completed door hinge. The angle of morning light catches his tray and sends a flash across the lane, accidental or signal. You cannot know. He looks up, makes eye contact, raises one hand in greeting. You raise yours in return. Good afternoon, the silversmith calls across the lane. Good afternoon, you return. He sets down his polishing cloth, steps to his doorway. The serving tray remains in the window half polished, reflecting the street in warped silver curves. Business looks steady, he observes. The forge stays busy, you say. I have noticed, the silversmith says. The conversation ends there. He returns to his bench. You return to your file work. The door hinge requires another 10 minutes of detail smoothing before the customer collects it this evening. The burrs along the pin housing must be completely removed, or the hinge will bind after a week of use. Your file moves in steady strokes. Across the lane, the silversmith's polishing cloth moves in circular patterns. 2 craftsmen working their respective metals in the autumn light of Elfreth's alley. Routine and observation in equal measure. The apprentice emerges from the back room with a bucket of quench water. He empties the old water into the lane gutter, and refills the bucket from the shared pump 3 doors down. The silversmith watches this operation with the same polite attention he gives all lane activities. Yesterday he watched the apprentice bank the forge coals at closing. Last week he watched a customer collect 6 horseshoes through the front entrance. He is documenting your patterns, or he is simply a neighbor aware of his surroundings. The distinction matters enormously. You finish the hinge and set it with the 3 others commissioned by the carpenter on 2nd Street. 4 hinges, 8 screws, delivery promised by nightfall. The work is solid. The carpenter will install them on a wardrobe frame, and never think about the blacksmith who made them possible. Anonymous competence. The forge needs feeding. You add coal in the specific arrangement that creates even heat distribution. Large pieces at the back, medium in the center, small toward the front. The apprentice has learned this pattern, but still places the medium pieces too far forward. You adjust them without comment. He watches. Nods. Will remember tomorrow. Across the lane the silversmith finishes polishing his tray. He holds it up to window light, examining the surface for remaining tarnish. Finds none. Sets it on a display shelf, beside 2 candlesticks and a sugar bowl. His inventory is always visible. Your inventory is distributed between the workbench, the back room, and locations you will never name aloud. Different metals require different operational security. The afternoon light shifts. The angle changes enough that the silversmith's window no longer reflects the street. You can see into his workshop now. The neat rows of tools. The polishing compounds arranged by grit grade. The account ledger open on a side table. His operations are transparent. Customers can walk past and observe the entire production process from raw silver ingot to finished serving piece. Your operations look identical until someone asks what happens in the back room. The answer to that question is metal stock storage, tool maintenance, and absolutely nothing else worth examining. This answer is either believed or investigated. So far, it has been believed. The carpenter arrives early. He examines the 4 hinges with the careful attention of a craftsman who knows what failure looks like. Tests each pin rotation. Checks the screw housing alignment. Runs his thumb along the plate edges to confirm no burrs remain. Good work, he says. Thank you, you say. He pays in continental script. You accept it without comment. The script is worth 60% of its face value today. Tomorrow it might be worth 55%. Next week the British might flood Philadelphia with counterfeit bills and crash the value to 30%. You will accept it regardless because refusing continental currency marks you as a loyalist sympathizer. The carpenter leaves through the front door. His footsteps fade toward 2nd Street. Across the lane, the silversmith has observed this entire transaction. You return to the forge. The coals are ready for blade work. You have 2 kitchen knives commissioned by the tavern keeper on Arch Street. His cook broke 1 knife on a frozen ham and wore another down to uselessness through years of daily service. The replacements must be sturdy, plain, functional, no decorative elements, no maker's mark beyond your standard stamp. The iron stock goes into the coals. You wait for the color shift that means forging can begin. The silversmith closes his shutters early, unusual. His typical pattern is to work until the natural light fails, then close for the evening. Today he is securing his workshop 2 hours before sunset. He moves through the closure routine with practiced efficiency. Shutters latched, display pieces removed from the window, account ledger returned to a locked drawer. He steps into the lane, glances toward your forge, raises one hand in farewell. You return the gesture. He walks toward Market Street and disappears into the general flow of evening foot traffic. You watch until he is no longer visible. The apprentice emerges from the back room. He has seen the silversmith's early departure. He says nothing. Returns to the grinding wheel and begins sharpening a set of cold chisels that have dulled from recent stonework commissions. The kitchen knife iron reaches cherry red. You pull it from the coals and begin the blade geometry. 12 strikes to establish the spine, 12 strikes to thin the edge, 12 strikes to create the tang that will accept the handle rivets. The rhythm fills the workshop. Across the lane, the silversmith's shuttered windows reveal nothing. His absence is louder than his presence. November arrives without ceremony. The temperature drops 8 degrees in 2 days. The forge work becomes more pleasant. The heat that was oppressive in August now provides necessary warmth against the cold settling into the workshop's stone walls. Your hands no longer sweat through the hammerwork. The iron seems more willing to accept shape, though this is perception rather than metallurgical fact. The Continental orders continue. 12 bayonets completed in October, 8 more commissioned for November delivery. The requests come through the alley door in coded conversations that sound like discussion of horseshoe specifications. A man asks about shoes for a draft horse. You confirm the stock is available. He mentions the horse has a particular gait that requires custom fitting. You understand he means the bayonets must be socket style rather than plug style. He agrees to return in 2 weeks. You begin production the same night. The work is steady rather than urgent. The apprentice has learned to identify Continental customers without being told. He recognizes them by timing, alley door visitors after sunset, and by the specific phrasing they use when discussing commissions. When a customer mentions urgent fieldwork, the apprentice knows to prepare the back room for immediate production. When they mention standard replacement, he knows the timeline is flexible. He has never asked why these distinctions matter. You have never explained. The British patrols maintain their schedule. Every third day an inspection team works through Elfreth's Alley. They examine workshops with the thoroughness of men who know resistance networks operate through craft trades. The inspector who examined only your top layer of horseshoes has not returned. Different faces now. Different patterns of examination. Last week an inspector opened your coal bin and thrust a rod through the contents, searching for concealed contraband. He found coal, closed the bin, moved to the next workshop. The geometry of concealment shifts with each patrol. The silversmith across the lane reopened his workshop the day after his early closure. His routine resumed without explanation. Morning polishing, afternoon fabrication, evening inventory arrangement. He waves when you make eye contact. You wave in return. The transaction contains no information beyond mutual acknowledgement of existence. 2 craftsmen working adjacent forges in occupied Philadelphia. The surface reads as ordinary. What operates beneath the surface remains unconfirmed. This morning a customer arrives through the front entrance requesting a replacement hinge for a stable door. You examine the broken original metal fatigue along the pin housing, common failure after 5 years of heavy use. The replacement will require 4 hours of forge work. The customer agrees to your price, pays half in advance, will return tomorrow for the completed commission. Standard civilian work. The stable hinge goes onto the workbench beside 3 door latches and a fireplace poker. Visible production. The kind of inventory a British inspector expects to find at a Philadelphia blacksmith's forge in November 1777. Beneath the workbench, wrapped in canvas and concealed behind a false panel, 8 bayonet blanks wait for tonight's shaping work. The inspector who searches coal bins has not yet discovered the false panel. You cannot know if this is fortune, or if the concealment design is simply adequate. The apprentice brings the morning's quench water. He has learned to fill the barrel to exactly 3 inches below the rim. Enough capacity for a full day's work without risk of overflow when hot iron enters the water. Small calibration, significant impact. You noted his improvement last week but have not mentioned it aloud. Acknowledgement of competence can make an apprentice self-conscious. Better he continues the correct practice without awareness that it is being evaluated. The stable hinge iron goes into the forge. You wait for forging temperature while preparing the anvil workspace. The hinge requires a specific curve radius to match the stable door's weight distribution. Too shallow, and the door will sag within a month. Too deep, and the hinge will bind against the door frame. The measurement must be exact. The iron reaches cherry red. You pull it from the coals and begin the curve work. The hammer falls in the familiar 12-strike pattern. The metal accepts the shape gradually, each impact moving it closer to the required radius. By the 8th strike you can see the final geometry emerging. By the 12th strike it is complete. You return the iron to the coals for edge hardening. Across the lane the silversmith is engraving a teapot. You can see him through his window, bent over the work with a fine-pointed tool, inscribing someone's initials into the silver surface. The engraving will take him all morning. Decorative metalwork proceeds at a different pace than structural ironwork. His customers pay for artistry, yours pay for function. Both services are necessary. Neither is more valuable than the other. The door opens. You glance up, expecting the stable door customer returning with a dimension clarification. It is the silversmith. He stands in your doorway, hands empty, no apparent purpose for the visit. He looks at the workbench, at the forge, at you. "I hope I am not interrupting," he says. "You are not," you confirm. He steps inside, moves to the workbench, examines the stable hinge with the attention of someone who understands metalwork, even when it is not his particular discipline. "This is excellent work," the silversmith observes. "Thank you," you say. He picks up one of the door latches, tests the spring tension, sets it back down with care. "You take great care with all your commissions," the silversmith says. "Quality is consistent regardless of customer," you confirm. "An admirable principle," the silversmith says. He looks at you for a long moment. His expression reveals nothing. Pleasant neighbor or intelligence collector, casual visit or reconnaissance operation. You cannot determine which, without asking a question that changes the nature of the interaction. You wait. "I wanted to mention," the silversmith continues, "that I will be closing my workshop next week. 3 days, possibly 4. I have been commissioned to create a full tea service for a family in Germantown. The work requires my full attention, and my workshop here lacks the space for a project of that scale." "I understand," you say. "I thought it courteous to inform the lane," he says, "in case anyone notices the closure and wonders about irregular circumstances." "I appreciate the notice," you say. He nods, moves toward the door, pauses at the threshold. "Your forge runs late some evenings," he observes. "Urgent commissions occasionally require extended hours," you say. "Of course," the silversmith says. "I have noticed the quality of your nighttime work matches your daytime production. Consistency across all operational hours. That is the standard," you confirm. He raises one hand in farewell, steps back across the lane to his own workshop. You watch him return to his teapot engraving, settling back into the work, as though the conversation never occurred. The apprentice emerges from the back room. He heard the entire exchange, says nothing, returns to the grinding wheel. You pull the stable hinge from the coals and complete the edge hardening. The work proceeds without interruption. The hinge will be ready for customer pickup by noon tomorrow. The bayonet blanks will be ready for alley door delivery by midnight tonight. 2 production schedules operating in parallel. The silversmith works his teapot engraving until the afternoon light fails. He does not look toward your forge again. His shutters close at the usual hour. His workshop lamp extinguishes precisely at sunset. Routine fully restored. The forge burns into evening. You begin the bayonet work once the lane traffic diminishes to safe levels. The apprentice assists with the tempering rotations, watching the color shifts with the attention you have trained into him over 6 months of night production. 8 bayonets shaped by midnight, wrapped in canvas, staged for delivery. The customer arrives through the alley door at 12:30. examines the work, pays in coins rather than script, British sterling, which holds value regardless of military occupation outcomes. You accept the payment. The customer departs through the alley without additional conversation. The transaction is complete. You bank the forge coals and secure the workshop. The apprentice sweeps the floor, removing the evidence of bayonet production. Metal filings, canvas scraps, the particular pattern of coal ash that indicates extended evening operations. By 1 in the morning, the workshop appears identical to how it looked at sunrise. A blacksmith's forge in occupied Philadelphia. Standard production. Civilian commissions. Nothing irregular worth investigating. You walk home through streets where British patrols pass at predictable intervals. The November cold has emptied the lanes of casual foot traffic. Only military personnel and those with legitimate nighttime business remain visible. You are walking home from your forge after completing urgent commissioned work. This is legitimate nighttime business. The patrol passes without stopping. You continue toward your lodging house 3 streets from Elfreth's Alley. The windows are dark, the other residents are asleep. You enter quietly, climb the stairs to your room, and sit on the edge of your bed without lighting a candle. Tomorrow the stable door customer will collect his hinge. You will begin work on 3 fireplace pokers, commissioned by a tavern keeper. The apprentice will maintain the forge. The silversmith will engrave his teapot. Routine will continue. Beneath the routine, the other work proceeds. 8 bayonets delivered, 12 more commissioned for December. The requests continue because the geometry of concealment continues to hold. How long it holds is not something you can control. You can only ensure that each day's work is completed to the same standard. Visible and invisible production both meeting the requirements of their respective customers. The mathematics are clear. You lie back on the narrow bed. The room is cold enough that you can see your breath in the darkness. Outside, the city continues its occupation routines. British patrols. Loyalist households. Resistance networks operating through the ordinary commerce of blacksmiths, coopers, printers, and silversmiths. The work is invisible because it looks like work. Sleep arrives slowly. When it comes, you do not dream of forges or bayonets or silversmith workshops. You dream of nothing at all. The decorative hinge for the loyalist silversmith must be perfect. Not because you respect his politics, because a flawed hinge gives him reason to examine your other work more closely. You are forging revolution through the quality of your loyalist customer service. This is either strategic brilliance or the most absurd operational security protocol ever developed. The hinge blank heats to cherry red. You lift it with the tongs and carry it to the anvil in 3 measured steps. The first fold requires precision. The decorative scroll pattern demands metal thin enough to curve without cracking, but thick enough to bear the weight of a shop door that opens 30 times daily. You strike. The iron responds. The forge hisses its approval. "Why spend so much time on his hinge?" the apprentice asked. "Because perfect work prevents questions about other work," you explained. "That seems indirect," he said. "All security is indirect, when direct would be fatal," you observed. The apprentice nods and returns to filing the 8th bayonet blank. The rasp whispers against iron in steady rhythm. You form the hinge's mounting plate. 4 hammer blows shape the rectangular base. 2 more strikes create the holes for mounting screws. The geometry must align exactly with the door frame measurements the silversmith provided. Across the lane, lamplight shows through the silversmith's window. He is working late tonight, probably watching your forge glow, probably noting that your shop stays lit 3 hours past most businesses on Elfreth's Alley. The hinge requires 1 more heating. You return it to the coals and pump the bellows twice. The Continental gun locks sit in a wooden crate beneath your workbench. 20 completed. Each one tested for spring tension and tumbler alignment. each one guaranteed not to fail after 200 strikes. The silversmith's hinge will be tested once, by his eyes, by his hands, by his 6 months of careful observation distilled into 1 moment of professional assessment. You lift the hinge from the coals. Final shaping. The decorative scroll must curve in a smooth arc without flat spots or hammer marks. Strike, rotate, strike, rotate. The iron cools from cherry red to blood red. You return it to the fire. The apprentice sets down his file. The bayonets are ready for final grinding. Tomorrow, you say, after the hinge is delivered. He understands. The bayonets can wait. The hinge cannot. The workshop air tastes of coal smoke and metal oxide. Your tongue carries the sharp mineral edge that settles after hours at the forge. The taste is familiar, reliable, the flavor of work that leaves no room for error. Outside, a cart passes on cobblestones. The wheels clatter in the rhythm of legitimate commerce. Inside, 20 gun locks wait in darkness beneath your bench. You quench the finished piece in the slack tub. Steam rises in a white column. The hiss fills the workshop. The hinge emerges dark gray, perfectly formed, ready for polishing. The silversmith will examine it in morning light. He will test the pin rotation. He will check the mounting plate alignment. He will compare it to every other piece of metalwork you have produced in the 6 months he has been watching. Your survival depends on his professional satisfaction with a hinge you hope never closes on anything that matters. Dusk settles over Elfreth's Alley in layers of blue shadow. You light the forge for night work. The coals catch quickly. They remember the day's heat and wake with minimal persuasion. The Continental contact will arrive after full dark. 20 gun locks. Final delivery. The order that began 6 weeks ago in coded phrases about door hardware. The apprentice banks the coals at the day forge and moves to the smaller hearth at the back of the workshop, the one not visible from the street. The one the loyalist silversmith cannot observe from his window across the lane. You pump the bellows. The coals brighten from dull red to orange. Heat presses against your face in familiar waves. The alley door opens without knocking. A figure steps inside and closes it behind him with care that makes no sound. The locks are ready? The Continental contact whispered at the alley. 20 completed. You confirmed. The captain will be grateful, he said. Gratitude is not the objective. Reliability is. You observed. The contact nods. He lifts the wooden crate from beneath your workbench, tests its weight. Satisfied. He counts 20 gold coins onto the workbench. The payment is exact. No haggling, no receipt. The transaction exists only in this moment, then dissolves. The camp kettles? He asks. You gesture to the shelf, where 6 iron kettles sit in a neat row. Camp equipment, legitimate forge work. The kind of order that appears in ledgers and explains your night fires to anyone who inquires. He takes 3 of them, leaves 3. The balance matters for some reason you do not ask about. The contact leaves through the alley door. His footsteps fade into the November darkness. You return to the forge. 2 bayonet blanks remain, the last of the order that has occupied your nights for 3 months. The apprentice waits for instruction. Final grinding, you say. Then we are finished. He nods and sets up the grinding wheel. The orange glow from your forge spills through the workshop windows, visible from the street, visible from the silversmith shop across the lane. You do not close the shutters. Closing them would be suspicious. Men who have nothing to hide do not hide their light. The grinding wheel spins. The apprentice guides the first bayonet blank against the stone. Sparks cascade onto the dirt floor in brief golden rain. The workshop floor is cold beneath your feet. Heat rises from the forge, but the November chill creeps through the gaps in the door frame. Your breath does not show yet. Another week, and it will. The second bayonet takes longer. The edge must taper evenly from base to point. Any irregularity will cause the blade to pull left or right when thrust forward. You watch. Correct his angle twice. The work must be perfect. The forge burns lower. The coals shift from orange to deep red. Outside, boot steps approach. Not the heavy rhythm of a patrol. Lighter, faster. The steps continue past your door. Someone walking home. No threat tonight. The apprentice finishes the final bayonet and sets it on the cooling rack beside its 7 companions. 8 bayonets. Shaped to match the bottom curve of 12 horseshoes. The mathematics held through British inspection. The geometry was correct. You bank the coals. The orange glow fades to crimson. The night air outside will be sharper than the air inside. The cold that follows a man home when the forge light finally goes dark. The final order is complete. The forge coals are banking. The orange glow is fading to crimson. You have forged 12 horseshoes, 8 bayonets, 20 gun locks, and 6 decorative hinges. Half of this will build a new nation. Half of this will keep you from being hanged for building a new nation. The accounting does not distinguish between the two categories. Neither does the exhaustion. The apprentice sweeps iron filings from the workshop floor. The rasp of straw against stone is the only sound in the settling darkness. You sit on the workbench edge and let your shoulders drop. 3 months of night forging ending in this particular silence. The loyalist silversmith's lamp is still lit across the lane. He works late most nights, watching, recording in whatever ledger he keeps of your patterns. Tomorrow, he will examine the decorative hinge. Tomorrow, the Quaker merchant's son will deliver another coded order or another polite question about forge glow timing. Tomorrow, the work continues. Tonight, the coals are banking. The apprentice hangs the broom on its wall peg. Should I return in the morning? Yes, you say. There will be horseshoes. There are always horseshoes. Legitimate work. The kind that appears in ledgers and explains your business to British patrols. He nods and leaves through the front door. His footsteps fade down Elfreth's alley toward the boarding house where he rents a room. You remain in the workshop. The forge coals shift and settle. Crimson fading toward black. The metallic taste of iron filings is still on your tongue. The hammer's weight is still in your right shoulder. The heat memory is still on your face. You stand and walk to the forge. The coals have reached the deep red stage before final cooling. Another hour and they will be ash. You do not add fresh fuel. The work is finished. The wooden crate that held 20 gun locks sits empty beneath your workbench. The continental contact carried them into November darkness. Somewhere tonight, a soldier will receive a musket lock that will not fail. He will not know who made it. He will not know the name of the forge on Elfreth's alley. The lock will work when he needs it. That is the only accounting that matters. The workshop smells of cooling metal and coal ash, the smell that lingers in clothing and hair and skin after a day at the anvil. Your wife will notice it when you climb the stairs. She always does. She never asks what you forged. You close the workshop shutters. The street outside is dark, except for lamplight from the silversmith's window. He is still watching. You bar the front door from inside and climb the stairs to the room above the forge where you sleep. The heat rises through floorboards. Warmth earned through 3 months of divided loyalty and perfect geometry. Tomorrow the silversmith will test the hinge. Tomorrow you will learn whether a perfect curve and flawless pin rotation can purchase another month of invisibility, or whether 6 months of observation have already written the conclusion you cannot see. The hammer rhythm has become the rhythm you fall asleep to. 12 strikes for horseshoes, 12 strikes for bayonets, The difference is 3 strikes in different locations. You dream in hammer patterns. This is either dedication to craft or evidence you have been a blacksmith too long. The forge does not care. It only cares that you return tomorrow. The pattern lives in your wrists now. Not conscious technique, but something deeper, written into muscle and bone through repetition that counts itself in years rather than days. When you close your eyes at night, the rhythm continues in the darkness behind your eyelids. Strike, 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 pause, strike, strike, strike. The weight of the hammer. The angle of approach. The sound the anvil makes when struck correctly, versus the dead thud when the blow lands wrong. You remember learning it. The master blacksmith who taught you, dead now these past 8 years, stood beside you, and counted the strikes aloud until you could count them yourself without thinking. 12 for a horseshoe, he said. Always 12. The shoe knows when you've cut corners. The bayonets take 12 strikes as well. Different locations. Different force. Same rhythm. The distinction lives in your hands. In the slight rotation of the wrist on strike 7. In the angle change at strike 9. In the way you must adjust your grip between strike 11 and strike 12, so the final blow lands precisely where it must. To anyone watching, it looks identical. To anyone listening, it sounds the same. But the iron knows the difference. You bank the coals at the end of each night, and the gesture itself has become part of the rhythm. The careful redistribution of heat, the covering with ash, the final check that nothing remains that could burn through the night unsupervised. Your hands move through the sequence automatically while your mind is already walking the dark streets toward home, already climbing the stairs to the room where you sleep, already horizontal in the narrow bed with the window that overlooks the alley. The rhythm follows you there. 12 strikes. 12 strikes. The difference in 3 locations. Sometimes you wake in the middle of the night and your right arm is moving. Phantom hammer strikes against phantom iron. The muscle memory so deep that sleep cannot suppress it entirely. You have become a machine that shapes metal. The machine does not stop when you leave the forge, it only idles. Your breath has learned the pattern too. Inhale on the backswing. Exhale on the strike. Pause while the metal rings. The respiration matches the work so completely that walking home feels like interrupted rhythm. Breath without purpose. Air drawn and released with nothing to shape. No iron waiting to receive the force of your lungs translated through hammer and wrist. Tomorrow the rhythm begins again. The coals brought back to heat. The iron pulled from stock. The first strike of the day that wakes the forge and reminds it what it was built to do. The hammer waits on its hook beside the anvil. It will be there when you arrive before dawn. It will fit your hand the way it always has. And the count will begin again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The revolution runs on this rhythm. The rhythm runs on your hands. Your hands run on the memory that no longer requires thought. Strike, 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 pause, strike, strike, strike. The pattern holds in darkness as completely as it holds in light. The concealment geometry lives in your mind as a solved equation. 8 bayonets. 12 horseshoes. The curve of the horseshoe bottom matching the curve of the bayonet blade with a precision measured in fractions of an inch. The mathematics are simple, the execution is not. You remember the first time you tested the pattern, laying the horseshoes in their stack, sliding the bayonets beneath in the spaces where the curves created pockets, checking from above to see what an inspector would see. From directly overhead, 12 horseshoes, nothing more. The bayonets invisible in the negative space between iron curves, their edges tucked into shadows that look like normal gaps in any stack of metalwork waiting for delivery. The trick was matching the curves exactly. A horseshoe bent for a draft horse has a different arc than a shoe bent for a riding horse. The bayonets required the arc of a heavy workhorse, the widest curve, the deepest pocket. You forged horseshoes you would never sell to create the geometry that made concealment possible. The British inspector walked through your forge 3 times during the autumn. Each time he examined the stack. Each time he saw 12 horseshoes waiting for delivery to a stable 2 streets away. Each time he moved on without lifting the top layer. The geometry held because the mathematics were correct. The mathematics were correct because you tested every angle before the inspector arrived. You stood where he would stand. You looked from where he would look. You verified that 8 bayonets could disappear into 12 horseshoes if the curves matched, and the placement was exact. The treason looked like clever metalwork. The clever metalwork looked like standard forge inventory. The inspector saw what he expected to see. Horseshoes stacked for transport. Nothing unusual in a blacksmith's shop. Nothing worth examining more closely than a visual confirmation that metal was present and work was being done. You remember the sound of his boots on the floor, the pause as he stood beside the stack, the moment of silence while he decided whether to lift the top horseshoe or continue to the next shop on his list. He continued. The geometry that saved you was geometry learned through years of shaping iron to exact specifications. The curve of a horseshoe is not decorative. It matches the curve of a hoof, and the hoof belongs to an animal that weighs between 800 and 1,800 pounds depending on breed. The fit must be precise, or the horse goes lame. The precision required for a horseshoe is the same precision required for concealment, matching one curve to another with tolerances measured in the width of a hammer strike. The iron does not distinguish between a horseshoe and a weapon, it only knows whether the curve is correct. You shaped both to the same standard. The British inspector walked through a forge where every piece of metal was exactly what it appeared to be, or exactly what it needed to be to survive examination. The geometry held because you did not trust improvisation. You tested, you measured, you verified. 8 bayonets beneath 12 horseshoes. The mathematics of survival rendered in iron. The inspector's boots faded down Elfrith's alley toward the next shop, the next forge, the next blacksmith, whose work he would examine without knowing what he was failing to see. The geometry remained, the bayonets remained, the revolution continued in the spaces between curves where trained eyes saw only shadows and empty air. Steel reveals its temperature through color, and color does not lie. Cherry red for shaping, orange for welding, yellow-white for springs. The progression from dull red through bright orange to the pale heat that means the metal is approaching its breaking point. This is knowledge written in light rather than words, learned through observation rather than instruction. You remember the first time you understood that temperature was a language. The master blacksmith pulled a bar from the coals and held it in the dim light of the forge. "What does it say?" he asked. You looked. The metal glowed deep red with a hint of orange at the edges. "Ready for shaping," you said. He nodded, placed the bar on the anvil, struck it once. The metal moved under the hammer exactly as it should. Soft enough to shape, hard enough to hold form. "The color tells you everything," he said. "Learn to read it." The reading became automatic. A glance at the coals tells you whether the fire is hot enough. A glance at the metal tells you whether the piece is ready. The thermometer that hangs on the wall of the forge is decoration. You have not consulted it in years. The temperature lives in the light. This skill protected secrecy more completely than locked doors. A British inspector examining your forge could verify that metal was being heated and shaped. He could watch you work. He could observe the process from beginning to end. But unless he knew how to read temperature through color, he could not distinguish between the heat required for a horseshoe and the heat required for a bayonet blade. Both begin at cherry red. Both require the metal to reach a specific temperature before the hammer strikes. The difference lives in the final tempering, the moment when the shaped metal must be heated again, and then cooled at a precise rate to achieve the correct hardness. A horseshoe can be quenched in water. The rapid cooling creates metal that holds its shape under the weight of a horse. A bayonet blade requires oil quenching. Slower cooling. The metal must retain flexibility, while achieving the hardness needed to hold an edge. Too fast, and the blade becomes brittle. Too slow, and it remains soft. The color that indicates readiness for oil quenching is slightly darker than the color that indicates readiness for water quenching. The difference is subtle. A quarter tone darker, visible only to someone who has spent years reading temperature through light. The inspector watched you quench horseshoes in the water barrel. He did not watch you quench bayonet blades in oil, because you only performed that work after he left, when the forge was yours alone, and the alley outside was empty of patrols. The temperature knowledge that protects you is temperature knowledge that cannot be taught quickly. It requires years of observation. Hours of watching metal change color in the coals. The accumulated experience of 10,000 pieces shaped and quenched and cooled. The forge keeps all secrets in its coals, but the coals only speak to those who know the language of heat made visible through light. You read that language in darkness. The forge glow illuminates the workshop but leaves the corners in shadow. In that partial darkness, color becomes more vivid. Cherry red appears deeper, orange burns brighter, yellow-white glows with an intensity that makes you squint. The color memory stays with you when you close your eyes. The progression from cool to hot, rendered in shades of red and orange and yellow that appear against your eyelids like after images of the sun. The forge breathes. The coals fade from orange to crimson. The workshop cools. Tomorrow the fire returns. Tonight, the memory of its heat remains. You remember the Quaker merchant's son asking about the forge glow. 3 weeks ago. Mid-afternoon delivery, iron stock stacked by the door. He lingered after the apprentice signed for it. "Your forge glows very late some nights," he said. You looked up from the anvil. Horseshoes don't forge themselves. True, accurate, not the reason. He nodded, smiled, left. The next week he asked about your coal consumption. You burn through stock faster than most smiths on this lane. Hotter fires make better work. True, accurate, not the reason. He was learning. Each question wrapped in politeness. Each answer technically correct. The gap between truth and reason widening with every exchange. You could see him assembling the pattern. Late fires. High coal consumption. Customers arriving through the alley door after dark. The forge glowing orange at hours when honest work should be complete. The problem with intelligent observation is that you cannot stop it without confirming the suspicion driving it. If you told him to stop asking questions, he would know why. If you changed your schedule to accommodate his watching, he would know why. So you continued, banking the coals at midnight, answering his questions with facts that missed the point entirely, letting him discover what he was already discovering. The Quaker merchant's son learned something those 3 weeks. He learned that a man can answer every question honestly and still conceal the truth. That accuracy and deception can live in the same sentence. That what you say and what you mean are different forms of metalwork. You taught him that without meaning to. Or maybe you meant to. Hard to say now. The 3rd week he stopped asking questions entirely, just delivered the stock, nodded at the forge. Left through the front door while you watched him go. Whether that silence meant understanding or surrender, you never learned. Whether he carried the information to his father, or kept it private, you never learned. The unanswered questions accumulate like coal dust in corners you cannot sweep clean. The forge cools in memory the same way it cooled in November, slowly. the orange glow fading to crimson, the heat lingering in the brick long after the coals go dark. The Quaker merchant's son will ask more questions tomorrow. The loyalist silversmith will watch more carefully tomorrow. The British patrol will inspect more thoroughly tomorrow. Tomorrow is a problem for tomorrow's blacksmith. Tonight's blacksmith is banking the coals and allowing the orange glow to fade to black. The metallic taste of freedom is still on your tongue. This is either poetic or you have been tasting iron filings all day. The workshop darkens. The questions remain. 6 months of watching. The loyalist silversmith across the lane. Friendly waves every morning, careful observation every evening. You remember noticing when it started. March. The apprentice mentioned it first. The silversmith watches your door a lot. You looked. The silversmith was polishing a candlestick in his window, facing your forge. His hands moved. His eyes didn't. You waved. He waved back. The pattern continued. Customers arriving through the front door in daylight received friendly acknowledgement. The silversmith nodded. Sometimes crossed the lane to discuss metalwork. Professional courtesy between craftsmen working the same material in different forms. Customers arriving through the alley entrance after dark received different attention. He didn't wave at those. He watched, counted, remembered. You couldn't ask him to stop without revealing you knew what he was collecting, couldn't change the pattern without confirming the pattern existed. So the surveillance continued, 6 months of observation accumulating into evidence you couldn't see but knew was there. Front door customers, alley door customers. Day work, night work, the silversmith's record growing more complete with every wave. Whether he reported what he saw you never learned. Whether he kept the information private, or shared it with the Crown, you never learned. Whether the friendly waves were genuine professional respect, or careful evidence collection, you never learned. The not knowing was the point. In Philadelphia 1776, trust was a luxury and paranoia was survival. The silversmith could have been a loyalist informant. Could have been a careful neighbor protecting his own business. Could have been both. You made the decorative hinge perfect. He examined it. Tested the pin rotation. Nodded approval. Fine work, he said. You nodded back. The watching continued. The forge breathed slower now. Memory cooling. The heat that pressed against your face in waves becoming something gentler. Something distant. The silversmith's window dark across the lane. The watching finished. For tonight. 4 components. The gun lock mechanism, tumbler, sear spring, bridle, cock. British tempering flaw in the sear spring, you found it the first night. The metal too brittle. Would snap under repeated firing, would leave a soldier with a musket that couldn't fire, when his life required it to fire. You heated the sear spring to cherry red. Held it there longer than the British specifications demanded. Quenched it slower. 15 extra minutes per lock. The Continental Army captain noticed the delays. These are taking longer than expected. You showed him the British lock. Showed him the flaw, explained the tempering difference between metal that looks correct and metal that remains correct under pressure. The soldiers who carry these locks, you said, will they prefer them delivered fast or delivered reliable? He stopped asking about delays. The locks became the standard, not because you designed something new, because you fixed something broken that nobody else had noticed was broken. The mechanism explained itself at the moment that mattered. 20 gun locks, 20 soldiers, 20 chances to fire when firing, was the difference between standing and falling. You never learned which battles those locks saw. Never learned which soldiers carried them. never learned whether the 15 extra minutes per lock purchased someone's survival, or merely delayed their inevitable end. The captain's hand on your shoulder when he collected the last one. A brief pressure, no words necessary, the weight of gratitude too heavy for speech. You nodded. He left. The forge memory fades to black now, the cherry-red heat becoming ember, becoming ash, becoming the darkness behind your eyes, where the hammer rhythm finally stops and the day's labor dissolves into something wordless. 4 components working together. The mechanism complete. Finally, rest. The decorative hinges were always the hardest work. Not because the metal resisted, not because the curves required more heat, or the pins needed finer tolerance. The hinges were hard, because they had to be perfect for a man who was watching you with questions he had not yet asked. 6 hinges for the loyalist silversmith across the lane, each one tested for spring tension, each one polished until the brass inlay caught the light at the correct angle, each one installed on a door that opened toward the street, where British patrols passed twice daily. The hinges had to work flawlessly, because the man who commissioned them had spent 6 months noting which of your customers arrived through the front entrance, and which used the alley door. Because he had counted the number of evenings your forge glowed past midnight. Because he had observed the rhythm of your hammer, and made notes about the pattern. The hinges were your answer to an accusation that had never been spoken. You remember testing each one, the weight of the door, the smoothness of the swing, the absolute silence of the pin rotation. No squeak. No resistance. Nothing that would suggest the blacksmith who made this hinge was distracted by other work, or rushing to complete an order that mattered more. Revolution forged through customer service. The phrase would be funny if it were not the operational reality. You survived because the man across the lane opened his door one morning and found that the hinge you installed performed exactly as promised. Because the brass inlay matched the candlesticks in his window. Because the craftsmanship was so good that it answered every question without requiring you to speak. You remember delivering the final hinge. The silversmith examined it in the November light, tested the swing, nodded once. "Good work," he said. You did not reply. You accepted payment. You walked back across the lane to your forge, where 8 bayonets were cooling beneath a layer of horseshoes, and 20 gun locks waited for final assembly. The hinge closed behind you without a sound. The hinges are cooling now in your memory, the brass inlay fading, the pin rotation slowing, the door they held swinging one last time before settling into stillness. The silversmith stopped watching your shop 2 weeks after you installed the last hinge. His attention moved to the cooper 3 doors down, who had started receiving late-night deliveries of barrel staves that arrived without the smell of oak. You remember thinking, the revolution continues because someone makes perfect hinges that never squeak. The thought dissolves now into the warmth of the memory itself, the satisfaction of work done correctly, the knowledge that excellence in small things purchases invisibility in large ones. The hinges hold, the door swings smooth, the questions fade. Your fingers remember the polished cloth moving in circles over brass, the smell of the compound, the particular ache in your forearm from maintaining pressure long enough to bring the inlay to mirror brightness. The forge breathes slower, the day releasing its shape, the work complete. The forge had opinions. This was the thing nobody tells you when you learn the trade. They teach you how to read the color of heated iron. They show you how to bank the coals for overnight burning. They explain the geometry of airflow and the mathematics of fuel consumption. They do not mention that after enough years the forge develops preferences. Your forge burned hotter for bayonets. The coals glowed with an eagerness that had nothing to do with the amount of charcoal you added, or the angle of the bellows. When you placed a bayonet blank into the heat, the temperature climbed without your intervention. The iron reached working heat faster. The forge wanted this work. For decorative hinges it sulked. Same coals, same fuel, same technique, but the heat built slowly. The iron took longer to show color. You had to work the bellows harder to achieve the same temperature you got effortlessly when shaping gunlock components. The forge knew what mattered. You remember the first time you noticed this? 3 years into the work, a morning spent on horseshoes followed by an afternoon shaping a bayonet. The difference in the forge's behavior was undeniable. You mentioned it to no one because explaining it would have required admitting you were making bayonets. The forge kept your secrets in its ash. Every spark that rose, every piece of scale that fell, every quench that sent steam into the rafters. The evidence dissolved into carbon and memory. The coals are fading now, orange to crimson, crimson to deep red. The heat that pressed against your face all day releasing into the November evening, the forge cooling toward sleep. The opinions remain, somewhere in the ash, somewhere in the iron that absorbed the heat and holds it still. You remember the sound of the coals settling, the small collapse as the fuel burned through and the structure shifted, the hiss of the last wood pieces becoming charcoal. The particular silence that follows when the forge stops breathing and becomes only stone and metal and fading warmth. The forge taught you that fire has memory. That heat knows the difference between work that matters and work that conceals. That a furnace burning in the right cause burns differently than one serving only survival. The lesson dissolves now with the light, the orange glow that lit your hands. The heat that kept you warm through winter mornings, the breath that was never only fire. The coals settle one last time, the structure holds, the warmth fades toward crimson, then toward black. The forge rests, the secrets kept, the work complete, crimson to black. The forge cooling, the day complete, 12 horseshoes, 8 bayonets, 20 gunlocks, 6 hinges. Half building a nation, half preventing your hanging. The orange glow fades, the heat releasing, your hands remembering the weight of the hammer, the rhythm that carried you through 16 hours of work. The metallic taste of freedom still on your tongue, the flavor of quenched steel, the bitterness of coal smoke, the sharpness of iron filing dust. Exhaustion descending. The forge breathes its last heat into the workshop. The warmth spreading, the stone walls holding what remains. Darkness arriving. Your shoulders release, your back straightens one final time. The leather apron heavy with the day's work, soot ground into the creases, burn marks from sparks that found skin. The lane outside quiet, the patrols passed, the customers departed, the alley door locked. The revolution continuing somewhere without you. The bayonets you shaped traveling towards soldiers you will never meet. The gunlocks functioning in battles you will never see. The hinges holding doors in houses where your name will never be spoken. The work complete. The forge black now. The coals exhausted, the heat fading into memory. You stand in the darkness. The workshop settling. The anvil silent, the hammer resting. Sleep approaching. The blacksmith is sleeping. The forge cool to black, the hammer silent on the bench, the anvil holding its shape in darkness. The horseshoes rest beside the bayonets, the geometry solved, the concealment complete. The revolution continues in distant camps, where men load muskets with locks that will not fail them. Where cavalry rides on horses shod with iron that holds its curve. Where doors open on hinges that make no sound. The work persists without the worker. On Elfrith's alley the November cold presses against stone walls. The workshop holds its warmth a little longer. The forge remembers the day's heat even as the coals fade to ash. The blacksmith's hands rest, the hammer rhythm silent. The metallic taste fading from memory. The city sleeps around you. the loyalist silversmith in his bed above the shop, the Quaker merchant's son in his boarding-house room, the Continental Army captain somewhere in the darkness planning tomorrow's requests. All of you sleeping. All of you dreaming. All of you holding secrets that dissolve in the space between waking and rest. The forge breathes no more, the coals extinguished. The fire that knew all your truths now only ash and silence. Merciful darkness descends, the weight lifts, the day releases its claim. The revolution can wait until morning. You are sleeping now.